The illegitimate president and dictator of Venezuela, Nicolás Maduro, was asleep in Caracas when a band of American soldiers wiped out a security force and arrested him and his wife without taking a single casualty. They transported him by helicopter, boat, and eventually plane to New York City, where he will now face trial in an American court under the United States legal system. And that is what we'll be covering in this episode of the New American Republic Forum. Nicolás Maduro, despite being a dictator, was elected democratically in 2013, and during the ensuing years he put his friends into power, corrupted the Venezuelan government, even further than Chavez did, which is saying something, and rigged elections in his favor, the most recent of which was the 2024 presidential election, where he only garnered a reality of around 30% of the vote, yet he claimed a complete mandate of the election. Over the last few years, he has further enforced his dictatorship and enforced it through people like Padrón and Cabello, who are high-ranking members of his cabinet and high-ranking government officials. The Venezuelan dictatorship is a regime of oppression, of silencing citizens and censoring their opponents. Many are arrested and killed for no reason, without due process, and never heard of again. For the United States, and honestly where I live in Miami, there is a widespread Venezuelan diaspora, mostly because of their attempt to escape from the Venezuelan dictatorship and seek freedom and democracy, finding the United States of America. A very similar flight to the Cubans, of which I am one, who escaped the Cuban dictatorship to find democracy and freedom in the United States. These Venezuelans have been hoping day and night for the freedom of their country so that they can see a prosperous and democratic Venezuela once again. President Donald Trump and his administration, with highlights being Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Secretary of Defense/War Pete Hegseth, alongside the United States Army, Navy, Air Force, Space Force, and Marines, have furthered this goal and prompted the idea that Venezuela may one day be free again. The dictatorships of Chavez and Maduro basically completely destroyed the oil industries of Venezuela and completely tanked its economy, which is an interesting fact considering that it is one of the most oil-rich nations in the world with tens of billions of gallons of oil sitting underneath them. With that potential, there are trillions of dollars to be made with the Venezuelan oil, yet the incompetency and lustful nature of the dictatorships that they've had have caused the nation to fall into basic poverty, with most of these citizens not being able to eat enough, to drink enough, or to live a good life like they can here in the United States of America. Beyond crippling his own country's economy and plunging his people into poverty, Nicolás Maduro also plays a major role in the Latin American drug trade, importing and exporting from Venezuela copious amounts of drugs to the United States of America. For such, he's been indicted on narco-terrorism charges, basically classifying him as a cartel boss who is also running one of the largest countries within South America. It was for these very reasons and charges that the Trump administration not only deemed it justifiable to bomb Venezuela, not only seemed it justifiable to seize Venezuelan oil tankers, but also deemed it justifiable to arrest Nicolás Maduro and his wife and bring them to the United States of America to face justice in true American courts. Backlash for his actions and the actions of administration have been intense throughout the geopolitical community, with many nations who proclaim ideas of democracy are then defending the dictator or the ex-dictator of Venezuela against the actions of Donald Trump. Which seems a little bit ironic that you have the same people who are participating in No Kings protests then going around and defending a basic king/dictator after we arrest him and bring him to justice. They promote democracy in their own nations. They say they promote democracy in Venezuela, but when it comes to act, they simply criticize and rebuke the actions of Donald Trump. As a Cuban American, I must come out in full support for the Trump administration's actions, and I can only hope that they do the same thing to Cuba, the country of my mother. I believe that removing dictators in our own hemisphere is completely justifiable and is what we need to do to ensure the security and safety of the American people and all Americans. And by Americans, I don't simply mean people of the United States of America, I mean people living in North and South America. Beyond this, there have been many posts, comments, and speeches which, beyond the idea that they're defending a dictator, which is funny in itself, have been promoting the concept that the United States of America should play no role in foreign events, occurrences, or elections, and saying that the Venezuelan people are the only ones that should be acting upon their own leaders, saying that the Venezuelan people have actually elected Nicolás Maduro and we should not have removed him, which, I mean, technically, if you listen to the Venezuelan government, they say it was a democratic election. But if you listen to any other news source and private institution, they will tell you that these elections are fraudulent. And to add insult to injury upon these poor people saying these things, the winner of the Nobel Peace Prize, Machado, was the opposition leader to Nicolás Maduro, whose party was the actual winner of the election. So it's very funny that people went from a few months ago supporting Machado and winning the Nobel Peace Prize in the fight for freedom in Venezuela to then saying that her actions and what she supports should not happen because the United States did it. I mean, if the Venezuelan people haven't done it for so long, I believe that it is our turn to then step in, and take sizable action to free the people of Venezuela. Now, if we move past the justifications for why we did this, which there are people that very vehemently fight against, which you also see very funny protests where you have pro-Maduro protesters who think that they are protesting for Venezuela eventually clash with actual Venezuelans who hate Maduro, and they explain to these people that they don't want them at all, and they don't want Maduro at all, and they don't want them to be supporting him. And those protesters say that they don't know what they're talking about and they're uneducated, calling the people of Venezuela uneducated after saying that the people of Venezuela should be the ones in charge of Venezuela. Kind of ironic. Now, if we move into the real justifications that people are fighting over, or the real problems, those more so arise in what's going to come after we depose him. What's going on right now. Now, in Trump's press conference, he was quoted many times as saying, "We are going to run Venezuela," which on the surface doesn't seem to be such a bad thing. The real problem arises in how that's going to be done, and more so, how much economic factors that are going to benefit the United States are playing a role in this matter. My main concern is if we're just doing this for the oil, which is a very common complaint against Trump and his actions, saying that the only reason we're intervening in Venezuela is so that we can regain control of our oil rights. Now, a very heavy criticism towards Trump that shows the real uneducated nature of so many people is when Trump says, we need to get back our oil. And people say, that's not our oil, it's Venezuelan oil. Why are you saying that's our oil as if we have any right to it? Now, people saying this obviously are showing that they did no research on this topic and are completely uneducated, right? The United States had oil contracts with Venezuela. We had agreements to drill Venezuelan oil. We had agreements to have that Venezuelan oil as our oil in exchange for payment, making it our oil. Those contracts were then nullified by Chavez and Maduro over time and basically removed all American drilling operations and American control of oil that was legally ours. What we're doing is retaking what is legally ours and what was legally and contractually given to us by Venezuela. The dictators illegally removed those contracts and illegally removed American drilling operations and American import and export of oil. So the common misconception that it's not our oil is just false. So to base all your criticisms on the fact that it's not our oil and therefore we shouldn't have it is honestly just completely ridiculous. But where real fears can arise, and honestly where I have a little bit of doubts in what we're going to be doing, comes in how we are going to institute democracy within Venezuela. Trump has openly spoken against Machado, saying that she doesn't have the mandate to rule and she doesn't have the respect of her people, which can be debated. She did win the Nobel Peace Prize, which seems like she has a lot of respect. On the other hand, she didn't actually run for election, which is because she was barred from running election, which is why González, who was the real winner of the election, ran for election in her place. So to say that she doesn't have the support of the people is half right and half wrong. Realistically speaking, I believe the Venezuelan people would support her being president if we were to have a real election between her and Maduro. On the other hand, technically she didn't win the election, and therefore technically she doesn't have the votes. And that's really the reason why I do not believe that putting someone into power that the United States handpicks is going to be the best solution, right? If we just place her into power, that removes the idea that we're having a democracy. Even if she should have won the election, I believe that the best course of events is to hold another election, hopefully within around a month or so, maybe 2 months, however long it takes logistically to organize the election. And then we'll have the election, and whoever wins that, of course, will be the next president of Venezuela. The problem with getting that up and running is, of course, you have a completely corrupt system with the Maduro, influence entrenched in almost every level of government, right? We have people still in the cabinet. Vice President Rodríguez, who's now the president or the acting president of Venezuela, was handpicked by Maduro. She's the real powerhouse of Venezuela, right? Maduro's a very pretty face, but at the end of the day, now she's the one running Venezuela, and she, of course, has allegiances to Maduro. Other members include Padrino and, of course, Cabello, who are extremely anti-American and have spoken very, very harshly against any cooperation with the United States of America. There were even rumors that they were going to coup Rodríguez because Rodríguez seemed to be working with the United States. Now, Rodríguez has seemingly been open to some form of cooperation with the United States, though in public comments and statements in the past, she has said that she's not going to even work with us. Now, the likely reason for this is, of course, that she wants to save face. If you're a dictator, or, a new dictator, you don't want to go out and say, yes, I'm going to be working with the people who just got rid of our old dictator. You want to say that you're going to be fighting against them. So, of course, she's going to say she's going to fight against us. In my personal belief, I believe that she's working behind closed doors, working with the United States, working with Rubio, working with Trump, to bring some form of democracy to Venezuela. So the real question is, what do we do with these people who are having loyalties to Maduro? Now, there's two real paths we can take with them. We can either kind of let them stay within the government, have our democracy, and very slowly kind of just phase them out until they lose power with new cabinets and new people. The idea that I prefer more is more so just pulling all of the roots out from the weeds, right? You pull out the weed, you pull out all the roots with it, right? So we pull Maduro out, we get rid of his entire cabinet. The way we go about that can be very disputed, right? I personally believe that if we can get them out of the country and get them out of influence, then we can have a better Venezuela. We can have a system that is more free of the corruption and more free of Maduro's influence. The way that goes about is, of course, in question. We're no stranger to threats. We literally took out their president by taking him in the middle of the night in a 90-minute operation. We can surely take their vice president or their minister of defense or their minister of the interior, right? Which are the main actors now that Maduro is absent. So they know that the United States can come in and just take them and bring them to U.S. courts. The question is, are they going to yield their power and allow us to then install a true democracy in Venezuela? Or are they going to fight against us, where they very well know the outcome is, of course, that they are going to be taken, like Maduro, in the middle of the night and brought to American courts? Well, they were at the very least faced life imprisonment or execution. Another crucial problem is that we don't actually have boots on the ground in Venezuela. We took out their dictator, but now the Venezuelan government and Venezuelan army are just running free within the country, basically continuing the regime. There's a common phrase online that nothing ever happens, and in reality, right now, nothing is seeming to happen, right? There's no change that's really visible. right? We're just letting them continue running their dictatorship, just with a new name, right? It's like how the Soviet Union, you lost Lenin, now you have Stalin, then Gorbachev, they continue to just go on to dictator after dictator after dictator, and there's not really any change, right? With the Soviet Union, you kept going until the dictator ended up kind of just saying, hey, whatever, and then you had freedom. But I very heavily doubt that the new dictator of Venezuela, Ms. Rodriguez, is going to give up power, as did Gorbachev for the Soviet Union. The fact is that without boots on the ground, installing democracy in Venezuela is going to be almost impossible without their cooperation, and I really doubt that they're going to truly cooperate with us, right? I mean, we literally just took like their boss in the middle of the night, and he's now in the United States of America facing criminal charges for narco-terrorism, which, by the way, they are all complicit in, and if we were to capture them, they would all go to jail for the same charges, so I'm not so sure how they would want to cooperate with us. So I believe that the only real course of action to bring democracy to Venezuela is if we really just put boots on the ground, have American soldiers enforce our plans to install a democratic government within Venezuela that is chosen by the Venezuelan people and not by corrupt government officials. And that's either by the current government willingly stepping down and moving to a nice apartment in Moscow, or by force where we capture them and we bring them to the United States as well. Or we leave them in Venezuela in Venezuelan prisons after we install democracy and we have them tried in Venezuela, which is actually kind of what I wish would happen with Maduro. Once we install a democratic government in Venezuela, what I hope for is that Maduro is going to be removed from the United States. He's going to be extradited to Venezuela, where he will then face charges in Venezuela. I think it's only right that the Venezuelan people are the ones that are going to have a trial, have a jury of Venezuelans, and then take him down and put him in prison for the crimes that he has committed against them, right? And hold him in a Venezuelan prison in the country that he destroyed for so many years. Now, the way that we do that, of course, is logistically extremely difficult, and a U.S. basic occupation of Venezuela and of Caracas is going to be extremely difficult to carry out, especially with the neighbor of Venezuela, Colombia, and their dictator, President Petro, basically saying that he's going to stand with the Maduro regime and the corrupt government of Venezuela in direct opposition to the United States of America. That's truly, though, the only real way I can see that an actual democracy is placed within Venezuela that can actually last. A removal of the Venezuelan constitution, which obviously does not have proper checks and balances if they were able to have two dictators who were elected and then destroyed the country come into power, right, in recent years. So I believe, I guess this is my plan of action for what we should do with Venezuela, right? We remove the entire cabinet either by their own choice or by our force. We install a new democracy in Venezuela. We oversee Venezuelan elections where anybody can run to be president and the Venezuelan people then choose their new president. Then hopefully the Venezuelan government reforms their constitution, adds stricter checks and balances, makes the executive not as powerful, makes the legislative and the judicial more powerful, more so as the United States system, as we've had 250 years of running this system and we haven't really had a dictator yet, crossing our fingers, right? And it's worked. We've had our checks and balances. Clearly their system does not work at all, right? And to go about that is going to be extremely difficult. There's been so many jokes about Marco Rubio being the governor of Venezuela or the new president of Venezuela as he runs the country. The fact is that we have a lot of work cut out for ourselves, and I believe our primary concern, beyond simply putting a democracy in Venezuela that will last the test of time, is ensuring that what happens in Venezuela is not like what happened in Iraq, or in Afghanistan, where we kind of tried to have a democracy, try to set them up, and then they just crumble immediately. Or once we leave, it just completely falls apart and they're taken over again. We need to ensure that the government of Venezuela stays democratic and it steers far away from any extremist views of dictatorships. And the concern is to be primarily with the Venezuelan people, and I truly believe that the concern should not be with extracting as much oil and wealth from Venezuela as we can. I really do hope that the primary motivations, and I truly do believe that the primary motivations are not for oil but for the Venezuelan people. But of course, we're going to have to see how this whole event plays out, and if we are truly able to install a democracy in the current dictatorship that is Venezuela. The United States is openly showing the world that when dictatorships are nearby, we are not simply going to stand around and let them occur. As we know from history, dictators rarely ever give up their power willingly. We have to force them to. And it has been 26 years of dictatorship in Venezuela, and their dictators very obviously do not want to give up their power. Maduro very obviously did not want to give up his power after his 13 years of rule, which is why the United States abruptly terminated his term. We removed him from power, and he is now sitting in an American prison or jail where he is awaiting trial in March. The fact is, the United States is now going to allow dictators, and especially allow dictators within our hemisphere, to run rampant and destroy their own nations, sending countless immigrants to the United States. We've seen countries that implore the reform, where they fix their nations and the people are happy with it and they stop coming here. And that seems to be a very primary justification, right? They're destroying their countries, and when you destroy a country and you plunge the people into poverty, the people don't want to stay there anymore. So of course they go to another country, and they go to the best country they can, which is of course the United States of America. For all these immigrants, they come to the United States. You see with Cuba, the same thing happens with Cuba, with Haiti, Nicaragua, with Honduras. It was happening with El Salvador. It was happening with Mexico, with Venezuela. They come to the United States because their countries, either run by dictators or ruined by cartels, which basically control a lot of these countries, have just ruined their countries. So they come here. And that seems to be a very primary justification. What the United States has shown the world is that we're not going to sit around and sign treaties and give speeches and make documents condemning dictators. We are going to put ourselves into action. And we are going to force these dictators out of power, and especially within our own hemisphere. We are willing to place American soldiers on the ground and display the full force of the United States military in order to do so. And we have sent a very, very strong message to dictators across the world that we will not stand for their regimes. And we will, as the leaders of the free world, remove them from power and free the people of their countries. Now, a very surprising aspect of this is, why has Russia and why have China not necessarily directly or indirectly intervened in the situation? Right? A very clear, thing to draw from this is that the three powers, I'm going to call them the three world powers, because that's really all there is. Europe is basically nothing. There's not really any other power in the world. It's the United States, Russia, and China. Those are the world powers at this point. The three world powers have basically drawn their spheres of influence on the world, right? Which is a good and a bad thing at the same time. Russia invaded Ukraine. We said we're not going to involve ourselves directly, but we are going to aid Ukraine. China is claiming Taiwan, and we still do have guarantees on Taiwan, but China is expanding influences economically throughout Africa and the Asian area. And the United States has put a very strong message that there will not be foreign influence, as the Monroe Doctrine indicates, within the Americas, within North and South America, and within our hemisphere. And that seems to be kind of a little bit of a scary, but also kind of a interesting thing to be occurring, that spheres of influence are very clearly being carved out. The question is, how far will these spheres of influence go, and how far will our justifications go in terms of defending and not defending nations within these spheres of influence, both economically and kinetically through war. At the end of the day, this is not necessarily an action based off of ideology. Right? I obviously am for the removal of Maduro because he is a socialist running his nation, but also and mainly because he is a dictator violating the will of the people. If he was a truly elected president, I could hardly justify his removal. But the United States is showing that we are not going to truly care about ideologies, about actual politics. What we actually care about is democracy and freedom for people throughout the world. The regime that comes after this might not be friendly to the United States, but as long as they're democratically elected, that is the choice of the Venezuelan people. And though I will not be happy with it, the United States has to stand for democracy throughout the entire world to ensure the people of the world can enjoy the same basic human rights and liberties that all Americans have. As a supporter of this doctrine, I can only hope that more people throughout the world can be liberated from oppressive regimes, as did the people of Venezuela and of the current actions in Venezuela. The people of Iran and of Cuba and even of Haiti, who don't really have a government, can only hope that one day their nations may be freed from their tyrannical dictators and oppressive leaders and may join the United States in the free world. For such, and looking into the future, I truly believe that the Iranian Republic, which is not a republic, it is a dictatorship and a theocracy, will collapse within the coming days, weeks, or months. And I truly foresee that Marco Rubio, being Secretary of State, is going to have a very heavy hand in the liberation of many Latin American countries. And I believe he has his sights set on Cuba, where he is, of course, a Cuban American, to liberate the island of Cuba from its oppressive regime that has controlled the nation for decades and caused my own mother and grandparents to flee that country. It is the hope of the Cuban people, the Iranian people, the Haitian people, the Nicaraguan people, the Venezuelan people, and people throughout the entire world to be free of dictatorships and full of democracy, liberty, and human rights.